My wife cheated on me with her boss, then suddenly filed for divorce claiming I was abusive, only to reveal she's been secretly siphoning our $250, $0 savings to fund her new life, and now she wants half the house worth $700, $0 in the biggest legal mess of my life. I never thought I'd be the guy sitting here, writing this down, but here I am. My wife, Emily, seemed perfect, beautiful, smart, successful. We had a pretty good life, or so I thought. We'd been married for 8 years, and honestly, I believed we were solid. But then, out of nowhere, everything started to unravel. It all began with small things. Emily started working late more often, claiming she had to finish reports or meet clients. At first, I didn't think much of it. She's a sales manager, so I figured her job just demanded long hours. But then I noticed she was more irritable, snapping at me over nothing and hiding her phone more than usual. She'd get defensive if I asked about her whereabouts, and the way she avoided eye contact when I tried to talk to her about us, something was off. One night, I came home early from work, something I rarely did, and found her in a rush trying to hide her phone behind her back. She looked guilty as hell. I asked her what she was hiding and she brushed it off, saying she was just talking to a friend. That was the first real red flag, but I shrugged it off. I told myself I was overthinking. A couple of weeks later, I decided to check her phone, just to see if I could get some peace of mind. I know, trust is supposed to be there, but I was feeling uneasy. I grabbed her phone from the nightstand when she went to the bathroom. That's when I saw a string of texts between her and a guy named Mark. They weren't just friendly. The way they talked about meeting up, the flirtatious tone, it was obvious. There were explicit messages, hints about sex, and plans for a secret dinner. My stomach dropped. My wife was cheating on me with her boss. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I stared at the screen, frozen. How could she do this? How long had it been going on? I kept scrolling through, and there were pictures, naked, suggestive photos she'd sent him. I couldn't believe it. My wife, the woman I loved, was betraying me with her boss, someone she worked with every day. I didn't sleep that night. I felt sick and betrayed. I wanted to confront her right then, but I decided I needed to gather more evidence. I started digging into her emails, her social media accounts, anything I could find. I found more messages, more than I expected. It wasn't just a fling. She'd been seeing Mark for months. They had a whole secret affair, and she was planning to leave me for him. The next morning, I sat her down. I told her I knew everything. Her face contorted into this nasty sneer, and she started spinning lies. She said I was paranoid, that I was imagining things. She claimed Mark was just a friend and I was overreacting. She said I was controlling, jealous, that I was making everything up. But I wasn't stupid. I had the evidence right in front of me. She got defensive, raised her voice, and then, out of nowhere, she accused me of being abusive. Said I yelled too much, that I was too controlling, and that she was afraid of me. I was stunned. That's when I realized she was trying to turn things around on me to shift the blame, but I knew the truth. I knew she'd been cheating, lying, and secretly planning her escape. The betrayal hit hard. I felt a mix of anger, heartbreak, and confusion. How could she do this? How could she lie so easily, pretend everything was fine, and then turn around and accuse me of abuse? I was furious. I wanted to scream, to break something, but I held it in. I couldn't believe I married someone who could be so manipulative and dishonest. That day, everything changed. I knew I had to decide what to do next, but I also knew that my life was about to become a lot more complicated. She was planning to leave, and I needed to figure out how to protect myself and what I'd worked so hard for. I found out she'd been siphoning money from our joint account, almost $250, $0 over the last year, under the guise of business expenses. I was livid. All that money gone just like that, and she was planning to run off with her boss. Mark, I couldn't believe the audacity. She was trashing me, accusing me of being abusive, while secretly draining our savings and planning her escape. I felt betrayed on every level. I knew I had to confront her again, but this time I'd be ready. I had to protect what was mine, my house, my money, my dignity. And I'd be damned if I let her walk away with half of everything, especially after what she'd done. That's where I am now. Still trying to process it all, trying to figure out what comes next. I never thought I'd be in this position, but here I am, betrayed, angry, and ready to fight for what's mine. After I found out about the affair and the money siphoning, everything spiraled even faster than I expected. I spent days just staring at the wall, trying to make sense of it all, but the more I thought, the clearer it became. Emily wasn't just cheating on me. She was actively planning her escape. And she was doing it with my money, our savings, without a shred of remorse. The first thing I did was contact a lawyer. I knew I needed to understand my rights, especially with the house and the money. We had a joint account, and she'd been secretly funneling cash into some offshore accounts I never knew about. I had to be careful. I also started digging into her emails and bank statements more thoroughly. There was a trail of her planning to leave, and it wasn't just about starting a new life with Mark. She wanted my house, our house, the one we bought together for $700, $0. She claimed she deserved half because she'd contributed equally, but I knew better. She was planning to walk away with a huge chunk of my equity, and I wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. The day I confronted her again, I laid out everything I'd uncovered. I told her I knew about the affair, the money she'd stolen, and her plans to leave. Her reaction: she called me paranoid, said I was crazy for accusing her of everything. She even tried to gaslight me, claiming I was just jealous and insecure. That's when she threw in the classic line, "You've been emotionally abusive, and I can't stay in a relationship where I'm afraid of you." I couldn't believe her. She was the one cheating, stealing, and scheming, and she had the nerve to play the victim. I remember feeling this strange mix of rage and sadness. Rage because she betrayed me so completely, and sadness because I realized I didn't even know who she was anymore. I'd spent years building a life with her, trusting her, and now it felt like everything was a lie. The worst part was knowing she'd been secretly siphoning money, our savings, our future, just to fund this new life with Mark. I found out she'd been transferring money into an account she kept hidden, and I had the proof. It was like she was planning her escape behind my back while pretending everything was fine. Over the next few days, I started making plans. I contacted a financial advisor, a divorce lawyer, and even a private investigator. I needed to protect what was mine. I also started documenting everything: texts, bank transactions, emails, just in case I needed to go to court. I didn't want to be blindsided or lose everything I'd worked for. The house, the savings, everything. I knew she was trying to spin it as me being abusive, but I had proof that she was the one in the wrong. The emotional toll was brutal. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and honestly pretty scared. I never thought I'd be this guy. I never thought I'd have to fight this hard just to keep what's mine. Every time I looked at her, I saw the woman I married, still pretty, still charming, but so different from the person I thought I knew. I kept asking myself if I missed the signs, if I ignored the red flags. But the truth is, she hid everything well. She was a master at pretending everything was perfect, while secretly planning her escape. The hardest part was realizing that she'd lied to me for so long about everything. About her feelings, about her intentions, about her loyalty. She'd been cheating, stealing, and manipulating, all while acting like the perfect wife. And now she was trying to turn it around, accusing me of being abusive. That was her move: gaslight, deflect, blame. But I wasn't falling for it anymore. I had the evidence, I had the law on my side, and I knew I had to stand my ground. I spent nights awake, going over every detail, trying to brace myself for what was coming. I knew she'd try to take the house, or at least a big chunk of it. She argued she deserved half because she contributed to the mortgage and household expenses, but that was a load of crap. She hadn't paid a dime of the mortgage in the last year. She'd been siphoning money out of our account the whole time. I wasn't going to let her walk away with my house or my savings without a fight. And then the shocker came. She filed for divorce, out of nowhere, claiming I'd been abusive. I was stunned. I knew she was spinning her web of lies, but I didn't expect her to go as far as to threaten me legally. It was a classic move: accuse the husband, distract from her own betrayals, and hope to get half the assets. But I knew better. I had the evidence, and I was ready to fight her all the way. Now I'm at a crossroads. The legal battle is about to begin, and I don't know how it's going to turn out. I just know I can't let her get away with what she's done. I can't let her take everything I worked for, especially after all the lies and betrayal. But the pain of knowing I was betrayed by someone I loved so much is still raw. I keep asking myself how I missed all the signs, how I didn't see her true colors. But I guess sometimes people hide their real selves well, until it's too late. The legal process moved quickly after Emily filed for divorce. It was clear she wanted to rush things, probably hoping to get her hands on the house and whatever she could squeeze out of me before I could mount a proper defense. I hired a lawyer I trusted, someone experienced in divorce and asset disputes, especially with complicated financial histories like mine. From the start, I knew I had to be meticulous. She'd been siphoning money for months, hiding accounts, and lying about her expenses. The evidence I had was overwhelming, but I also knew she'd try to spin it all against me. One of the most shocking moments came when I reviewed her emails from her work account. It wasn't only the affair with Mark. There were plans to leave, to take half the savings, and even hints about how she'd manipulate her way into the house. She'd been talking to her lawyer, plotting how to claim the house, even suggesting she accuse me of abuse if I tried to stop her. That was a punch in the gut. I realized she'd been planning her escape for months, using the divorce as her weapon. I also discovered she'd been secretly transferring money into a separate account she kept hidden from me. The total, nearly $250, $0 just sitting there, waiting to be claimed. That was our savings, our safety net, and she'd been draining it slowly, all under the guise of expenses or investments. I confronted her with the evidence, and her reaction was cold. She claimed she deserved half because she contributed to the house and the household. I shot back that she hadn't paid a dime of the mortgage in over a year, that she was just taking what she wanted. She accused me of being controlling, said I was paranoid for checking her accounts. I told her I wasn't paranoid, I was protecting what was mine. Things escalated quickly. She hired her own lawyer, which I expected. The courtroom battles started, and I knew she would do everything to try to get her hands on the house. She argued she deserved half the value because she'd been married to me for so long, even though she'd been secretly planning her exit. Her lawyer pushed hard, claiming I was emotionally abusive and that I'd been controlling. That was her tactic, spin a story that made me look like the villain while she was the victim. Meanwhile, Emily's attitude was downright bitchy. She'd throw tantrums during meetings, scream at me during court hearings, and try to guilt-trip everyone involved. She insisted she was the victim, that I'd been a terrible husband, and that she had no choice but to leave. She denied everything about the affair, even when I presented her with proof, screenshots, bank transfers, emails. She just lied and lied, twisting the truth to fit her narrative. It was infuriating. I could see through her act, but it was clear she was trying to manipulate the system. The emotional toll was brutal. I felt betrayed, angry, and exhausted. I'd trusted her for so long, and now I was fighting to keep my house, my savings, my reputation. I kept replaying everything in my head, how she'd lied, cheated, and secretly siphoned money, while she played the victim. It was a constant battle of truth versus lies, and I was starting to lose sleep over it. I wondered if I'd ever feel normal again, or if I was just destined to be the guy who got screwed over by his own wife. One thing was clear. She wanted to take everything she could, including half the house. She claimed that since we'd been married for so long, she deserved her fair share, regardless of her betrayal. That's when I realized I needed to be strategic. I hired a financial forensic expert to trace her money transfers, and I prepared my case to show she'd been secretly draining our accounts. I also started documenting her behavior, her tantrums, her lies, her refusal to cooperate. I knew the judge would see through her, but I had to be ready. It was also around this time that I started feeling a mix of regret and resolve. Regret because I'd trusted her, believed in our marriage, and now I was fighting to save what little I could. Resolve because I refused to let her walk away with everything, especially after how she'd betrayed me. I'd worked hard for that house, that savings, and I wasn't going to let her take it all without a fight. I knew the legal battle would be long, messy, and emotionally draining, but I was determined to come out on top. Every day brought new surprises. She'd threaten me with false accusations, plead with me to settle out of court, or try to turn family members against me. But I stayed firm. I knew her game. She was trying to wear me down, to make me feel guilty, to make me give up. But I refused. I reminded myself why I was fighting, because I deserved to keep what was mine, and because I wasn't going to let her destroy everything we'd built. In the back of my mind, I kept thinking about how this all started: small signs, ignored red flags, and now, a full-blown legal nightmare. I'd never been a confrontational person, but this situation changed me. It made me realize how fragile trust is, and how easy it is for someone you love to turn into a stranger overnight. I felt like I was fighting not just for my money or my house, but for my dignity. And I wasn't planning on giving her an inch. Without a fight, the court hearings dragged on for months, and every session felt like a test of endurance. Emily was relentless, her lawyer more so. She kept pushing the narrative that I'd been emotionally abusive, that I was controlling, and that she deserved half the house simply because we'd been married so long. She even brought up petty things, like me checking her phone or questioning her whereabouts, claiming it was evidence of my supposed abuse. It was infuriating. The court was supposed to be about facts, but she was turning it into a circus. Meanwhile, I had my own strategy. I hired a private investigator to follow her, just to confirm her whereabouts and see if she was sticking to her story. Turns out, she was still meeting with Mark, even after she filed for divorce. It wasn't just a fling, it was ongoing. I also had the forensic accountant trace her secret transfers, and the numbers were staggering. Nearly $250, $0 gone in just a year, siphoned into accounts she kept hidden from me. It was clear she'd been planning her escape for a long time, using my money as her ticket out. I remember one day during a particularly heated court session, her lawyer argued that I was a controlling monster, that I kept her isolated and scared. Emily nodded along, smirking like she was winning. I couldn't stand it. I stood up and told the judge about the money she'd stolen, the affair, and her attempt to manipulate the court. I presented all my evidence: screenshots, bank statements, witness testimonies. It was a relief to finally lay it all out. The judge listened carefully, and I could see the wheels turning. I knew I had a strong case, but Emily wasn't giving up. She continued to lie, deny everything, and try to paint me as the bad guy. She claimed I was violent, that I'd hit her once or twice, which was a lie, and that I'd been emotionally abusive from the start. I sat there, trying not to lose my temper. I knew her game, playing the victim, trying to sway the judge's opinion. But I also knew the truth. One of the worst moments was when Emily's lawyer submitted a report claiming I had a history of controlling behavior that justified her request for half the house. The report was full of half-truths, exaggerations, and outright lies. I felt my blood boil. I had to stay calm, so I responded with a detailed timeline showing her pattern of deception, how she'd been secretly siphoning money, cheating, and manipulating everyone around her. I knew I was proving her wrong, but it still felt like a battle for my sanity. Throughout all this, Emily's attitude grew more bitter. She'd glare at me during hearings, whisper insults to her lawyer, and sometimes even try to guilt me into settling. She'd say things like, "You're going to regret this," or "You're not going to get away with treating me like this." I just kept my mouth shut and let the evidence speak for itself. I was tired of her lies, tired of her manipulations. I wanted justice. The emotional toll was intense. I was exhausted physically and mentally. I'd lost sleep, lost my appetite, and felt a deep sense of betrayal every time I looked at her. I kept asking myself how someone I loved so deeply could turn into this vindictive, manipulative stranger. I was also angry, so angry at her for stealing from us, for lying, for trying to destroy my reputation. But I knew I had to stay focused. I had to fight for what was rightfully mine. One of the hardest moments came when Emily accused me publicly of being abusive. She claimed I'd yelled at her, called her terrible names, and even hit her once or twice. I denied it all, but her words stuck with me. I knew her tactic: to paint me as the villain so she could get sympathy from others and maybe sway the judge. I felt humiliated, but I also knew I had to stand tall. I had witnesses, texts, and emails proving I'd never been violent or controlling. Still, her accusations hurt. As the months went by, I started to realize that this legal battle was less about the house and money and more about her trying to destroy me emotionally. She wanted to make me look bad to justify her stealing and cheating, but I refused to let her win that way. I kept my composure, gathered more evidence, and stayed firm in my resolve. I knew I wasn't going to let her walk away with half the house without a fight. I was determined to protect what was mine, my home, my savings, my dignity. And then the bombshell hit. She filed a counterclaim accusing me of abuse, claiming I'd been threatening her and demanding custody of our daughter, Chloe. That's when I realized her game was darker than I thought. She was trying to destroy me completely, emotionally, financially, legally. I had to prepare myself for the worst. I knew she'd do everything to twist the truth, but I also knew I had the evidence to fight back. I was tired of her lies, tired of the way she'd manipulated everyone around her, but I was not giving up. Not now. Not after everything we'd been through. The courtroom battles kept dragging on, and every session felt like a new level of hell. Emily's accusations became more desperate, more malicious. She spun stories about how I'd been abusive, controlling, and even violent. Her lawyer played the sympathy card hard, claiming that I had a history of aggressive behavior and that I needed to be kept away from her and Chloe for everyone's safety. I couldn't believe the audacity. All the while, I had mountains of evidence proving she'd been lying: texts, emails, witness statements, and yet her accusations stuck like poison. I knew I had to respond strategically. I gathered every piece of evidence I could, call logs, messages, bank statements, and worked with my lawyer to craft a narrative that would expose her lies. I also hired a private investigator again to confirm her ongoing meetings with Mark. Sure enough, she was still seeing him, even after she filed for divorce. It was clear she was trying to rush the process, to get her hands on the house and the money before I could stop her. One of the most infuriating moments was when Emily's lawyer submitted a report claiming I'd been physically abusive, something I knew was a complete fabrication. They even brought in a supposed witness, a neighbor who claimed to have seen me yell at Emily once or twice. But I had my own witnesses, friends and coworkers, who testified that I'd never laid a hand on her, that I'd always been calm and respectful. I also had texts from Emily herself, apologizing for her own outbursts and evidence that she'd been the one controlling and manipulative. Despite all this, Emily's strategy was clear: paint me as the bad guy, the villain who's dangerous. She wanted to spin her lies into a narrative that would sway the judge's opinion. I could see through it, but it made me furious. Every time I thought I'd get a break, she'd come back with another accusation, another lie. It was exhausting. I felt like I was fighting a war on every front, emotionally, financially, legally. The worst part was feeling the weight of her manipulations. She'd call me abusive to anyone who would listen, family, friends, even her lawyer, while secretly trying to destroy me financially. I found out she'd been funneling money into her own accounts, draining our savings and planning her escape for months. It was a calculated, cold-blooded betrayal. And all the while, she was trying to make me look like the monster. I also started to realize how much her accusations were affecting Chloe. She'd been caught in the middle of this mess, and I could see her growing confused and scared. I didn't want her to think I was some kind of monster. I made sure to have witnesses testify that I'd always been a loving, responsible father. Still, her false claims and her ongoing affair with Mark made it hard to stay confident. Every day I wondered if I was doing enough to protect Chloe from her mother's lies. Throughout all this, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of betrayal. I'd married Emily thinking she was the one, the person I could trust forever. But she'd been secretly planning her escape, using me and our daughter as pawns. I kept asking myself how I missed all the red flags, how I let her get so deep into this deception. The feeling of being played, of being used, was almost worse than the legal fights. One thing I knew for sure: I had to stay strong. I couldn't let her victory be in destroying my reputation or taking away my home. I had to fight for everything I believed was right. I worked tirelessly with my lawyer to prepare for the final hearing, knowing that Emily's lawyer would pull out all the stops. I also made a point to stay close to Chloe, to remind her that I loved her and that I'd do everything to keep her safe and happy, no matter what. The most shocking development came when Emily's lawyer submitted a motion claiming I'd threatened her, that I was dangerous. I was stunned. I'd never raised my voice at her, never laid a hand on her, and yet here they were trying to paint me as the villain. I had to produce proof, witness statements, security footage, anything that could counter her claims. It was a brutal reminder of how low she was willing to go. In the midst of all this chaos, I learned a hard lesson. Trust is fragile, and people can hide their true selves for a long time before everything comes crashing down. I also realized that protecting what's yours, your home, your reputation, your sanity, requires more than just legal muscle. It takes resilience and a willingness to face the ugly truth. I've been blindsided by her betrayal, but I refused to let her win. I was determined to hold my ground, to keep what I had worked so hard for, and to fight for my daughter's future. Now I'm just waiting for the final decision. I don't know how it will turn out, but I do know one thing. I'll never forget what she did, and I'll never let her see me broken. No matter how vicious her lies, I know the truth. And in the end, I hope that's enough. The final hearing was a whirlwind. After months of legal battles, lies, and accusations, it all came down to that one day. I sat in the courtroom feeling exhausted but resolute. Emily looked smug, confident that she'd come out on top, but I knew I had the evidence to back me up. My lawyer laid out everything: proof of her affair, the siphoned money, her manipulative tactics, and her false accusations of abuse. I could see the judge carefully reviewing each piece of evidence, and I felt a flicker of hope that justice would prevail. Emily's lawyer tried every trick in the book, arguing that I was dangerous, controlling, and abusive, hoping to sway the judge's opinion. But I stayed calm, presenting my side with clarity and conviction. I explained how she'd been secretly draining our savings, betraying our marriage, and trying to turn everything against me. I told the court about her ongoing relationship with Mark, how she'd been planning her escape for months, and how her accusations of abuse were just a desperate attempt to deflect blame. The judge listened intently, asking questions, reviewing the documents, and considering all the testimonies. I saw Emily's face falter a little when I presented the bank statements and her own emails, where she'd been conspiring to leave and take half the house. I could tell she was realizing her lies weren't holding up. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge made her decision. She awarded me full custody of Chloe, recognizing that Emily's ongoing affair and her manipulative tactics showed she was unfit to be the primary guardian at this point. She ordered Emily to pay back the stolen money, which she'd already transferred into her own accounts. And most importantly, she awarded me sole ownership of the house, ruling that Emily was not entitled to half because her actions had fundamentally betrayed the marriage and compromised her claims. When the judge announced the ruling, I felt a flood of relief and exhaustion washing over me. I looked over at Emily. Her face was a mix of anger and disbelief. She had expected to walk away with a big chunk of everything, but instead, she was left with nothing. Her final attempt to manipulate the system had failed, and I was finally free from her web of lies. In the days that followed, I worked hard to rebuild my life. I moved into the house alone with Chloe, who was still confused but mostly happy to be with me. I filed for divorce, finalized the legal battle, and started the long process of healing. I also made sure Emily couldn't come near Chloe without supervision, because I knew she'd try to manipulate her, just like she'd manipulated everyone else. Looking back, I realize how much I've learned from this nightmare. Trust is fragile, and sometimes the people you love the most can turn out to be the biggest liars. But I also learned that resilience and standing up for yourself matter. I could have let her destroy me, but instead I fought back. I gathered evidence, stayed strong, and refused to be bullied. It wasn't easy, far from it, but I came out the other side knowing I did what was right. Now, I'm focusing on rebuilding my relationship with Chloe and making sure she feels safe and loved. I've started therapy to deal with the emotional scars, and I've become more cautious about who I trust. I don't regret fighting for what's mine, even though it's cost me so much. Because in the end, I know I did everything I could to protect myself and my daughter from her lies and betrayal. I guess the biggest lesson for me is that honesty, loyalty, and respect are everything in a relationship. Without them, everything crumbles. If you're ever in a similar situation, trust your instincts, gather your evidence, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. Because sometimes the truth needs a voice, and you're the one who has to make sure it gets heard.